Hey everybody, Nick here, and today I got a review for you of this little guy right here. This is the Grambeau Assetto. First off though, before I go any further, I gotta let you know, this guy, actually both of these guys were sent to me by the maker. Grambeau Knives reached out to me, said, hey Nick, I'd love for you to check out my, the Assetto model I'm putting out there. And I said to him, as always, that sounds great, but I'm gonna have to talk about the good, the great, the bad, the ugly. I sent him the full disclaimer on my website. He did still choose to send it along, but nonetheless, we do have, to assume that this is the very best quality controlled pair of these two ever, and I'm also doing my best not to let the fact that these were sent my way affect the nature or the quality of my review. Sorry, realized I should have degunked this. Okay, let's go on ahead and do a bit of a size comparison. So I have two versions of this knife, by the way. I've got the titanium and the regular one. You can see here that size-wise, they are identical. So let's go on ahead and take a look at size comparison. Here it is against the Spyderco PM2. What we're going to see here is in terms of sharpened length, they're actually almost identical, but the overall size of the Assetto is a little bit smaller. This is, of course, your Spyderco Delica, and what we're going to see here is, in terms of handle size, pretty similar, although blade length is longer on the Assetto. And here it is against the Ontario Rat number 2. And what we're going to see is, a little bit bigger in the Assetto situation, but there you go. Next thing, what the heck is Grambeau Knives? Well, Grambeau Knives is a dude down in Australia, named, I believe, Gain Grambeau, and he is a knife designer, and he has made a decision to work with Bestech. Bestech is a Chinese manufacturer who has done a lot of work for a lot of people, right? Grambeau is not the first person to use Bestech by any stretch of imagination, but at the same time, Bestech has made this knife to his specs, basically. He is then getting these over in Australia and then shipping them here to the US or to any other place you ask, I imagine. Both of these models right here, just to give you a sense of what's going on, both of these are actually $300 shipped. That's $275 and $25 shipping from down under, and so there is that. So let's go on ahead and actually here, let me display them as they are in Australia. Sorry, that was a terrible joke. Anyways, let's go on ahead and jump into the good, the great, the bad, and the ugly of this very interesting little knife right here. So, first off, the disassembly on these guys was pretty straightforward, right? Especially for the titanium one, it's really pretty simple, right? You only got a couple of screws here. On the micarta one, you've got to take out some screws there. But nonetheless, it was a quick disassembly. It was very easy. No problems there. That's a beautiful thing. Next thing, the branding on these guys is pretty subtle, right? What we see here is Grambeau, engraved right above the pivot there, but in such a way that if you look at it from afar, you might not even notice it, right? It's not particularly loud or obnoxious. The blade itself is sterile, not in the surgical sense, but in the nothing written on it sense. And then the only other thing that's written on these guys is on the back here, and that is M390 and then number 79. Which is the number of this particular piece. As you can see here, this one here is 47. So there you go. So I like the fact that the branding on this guy is subtle, the clip is clean, etc. Nice thing. Next thing, this has a good lanyard hole. And by good lanyard hole, I mean a lanyard hole that I don't have to think about ever unless I use a lanyard, right? You can slip the lanyard right through this little area back here, and it wraps around this tube, and then it's there. It's right in your hand. You can have it hanging out to your heart's content, wiggling and whatnot. But at the same time, if you don't care, you don't care and you don't see it, right? It's not visible. No, and it actually doesn't matter. And even on the titanium one, it is a blind hole. That is the best kind of lanyard hole, one that I don't have to think about. So that's good. Next thing, the clip on this guy is nice. It is a nice solid clip. It has good tension to it. It's got good length. It is a little bit more on the shallow carry side. This is how much of this guy is sticking up out of your pocket. Makes for easy access, but also makes for, well, a fair amount of knife hanging out the pocket. That is the thing to consider, but the clip works very well. And the ergonomics on these guys are actually quite good. This works really well in my hand, given I have smaller hands than most, but the overall curvature, coupled with this little bit of, it doesn't really feel like a thumb ramp, but it kind of effectively is one, and the overall, it works very well, and he's got good chamfers along all of the various edges here. You can see there's a chamfer here, there's a chamfer here. This is just a overall very well done knife for the hand, the rounding of the clip here, as well as the rounding of the handles here. These aren't just slabs, these are rounded pieces. It just makes this feel very nice in the hand. Next thing, on this guy specifically, on the micarta one, the bolster lock removes any possibility of lock bar pressure. As you are front flipping this guy, you can have your fingers pressing down on this and it doesn't apply extra pressure. Unlike on the frame lock version, where if you have your finger right here, it's pressing down on this, that makes the knife a little bit harder to open. It's not the end of the world even with this guy, but on the bolster lock, it's just very consistent. It always takes exactly the same amount of force to open, and that's a nice thing. It's something I appreciated, and frankly, it's pretty attractive. I like the micarta here, and it is well done. It's a little bit more on the clothy side of micarta, but that's, I think, a better approach than going with something that feels mostly like plastic that once saw a bit of fabric, right? So there's that. The build quality on this is fine. It's a Bestech, right? And this feels very much like a Bestech, right? It's got some nice details to it. The engraving is all done well. It's made perfectly well, right? It has a fine action, right? It is not the smoothest thing ever, oh my god, but it is plenty smooth. It has a fine detent, especially for front flipping. That is something needs to be dialed in here. And was dialed in, let me be clear here. The construction on it is fine. It is centered. It is basically right up the middle, and it's right where it needs to be. It is in that state that most of the knives coming out of Bestech are, which is just like good to go. And that's a beautiful thing, right? The build quality here is great. And then finally on the good side, I think the design on this is very good, right? It has a very simple, very clean design. It's very sterile, yet it feels a little bit different than everything else, right? I'm not saying it's, oh my god, entirely different than the rest of the knife world, but I took a look at this and it was like, oh, huh. Yeah, that's interesting, right? It's got this little bit of horn here. It's got this little bit of curve. It's got this nice area here for great lock bar access. It is a very interesting design, and it's a little bit different than every other flipper frame lock. Wow. Doing this on camera is a little bit harder. I have not actually missed a flip in person. But nonetheless, this is a very nice little design, and I think it actually ends up looking a lot better than sort of a lot of the other knives out there. And so, I think there's enough differences here. But more importantly, it is a conscientious design, right? Good design, good looks are beautiful, but having, good thought put into things about rounding like these chamfers, like the hidden lanyard hole, like all of these things, to me, that means a lot more because it means the knife is going to just carry really well, and it's going to be a really nice piece. So this is a very, very nice design. And to me, that's the good. It is a very nice, clean, simple design. The build quality is a Bestech, so it's good to go. Bolster lock removes lock bar tension sort of from the equation, so to speak. You don't have to worry about where your fingers are. Ergo's a good, nice, solid clip, unobtrusive lanyard hole, subtle branding, and pretty straightforward disassembly. On the great side, I actually went back and forth. It could be the design on this guy, because that's a little bit more unique, but the blade on this is quite good. Right, this is an M390 blade, and given I wasn't able to test the hardness or anything like that, but nonetheless, it performs like I would hope M390 do. And I put this guy, particularly actually this guy, through some paces, but it puts in good work. It has a grind that I don't know if it is actually a hollow grind or whether it just feels like a hollow grind. Like looking at the optical distortions, it seems like a very light hollow. But nonetheless, the end result, though, is that it has an edge that is very, very thin, right? It comes down to a nice thin tip and has a nice thin edge on the other side here. It cuts very well. This is a solid blade. It puts in very good work. The days that I carried this was a perfectly good cutting tool. And I really do appreciate that. And to me, well, that's what's great here. On the bad side, first off, I'm actually not really particularly a fan of having the steel and the numbering be outside of this knife. The rest of the knife is very, very clean and very, very sterile, right? And I think that's a very nice thing. And then having this just randomly lasered on there just doesn't do it for me, right? I would have preferred to have seen it like lasered on the inside here, or, maybe in a place that is hidden when the knife is open and closed, like someplace in this vicinity, such that you can see it. Okay, that would not be hidden, but nonetheless, there is a clever place that could have been put, that is not right here. And given some part of that is because of the internal skeletonization, which I probably could have mentioned in the good on both of these guys, right? He's done some efforts to take the weight down a little bit. But nonetheless, I'm just not a huge fan of having this on the outside here because it feels like it mars a knife that is otherwise very, very sterile. Very, very nice. Next thing, both of these could use to have a little tiny bit more of a sharpening choil. It has a pretty abrupt plunge, but on both of these guys, I'm going to see if I can get it to reflect in the light right there at the very bottom of the knife. Little tiny unsharpened portion, right? That to me indicates that they need like a millimeter more sharpening choil on this guy to be able to fully get that grind in there. End of the world? No, not at all. But it is a thing, and at this kind of a price point, $300, that's a thing I should consider. Right, next thing, the frame lock, like I said, does have some variation with lock bar pressure. Now, I want to be very clear, this is always the case, right? Any frame lock is going to have variation in the force required to actuate it when you are putting your fingers onto the bar here, right? That is universal to all frame locks that are conventionally designed. This, however, is avoided by using the micarta, and so if you are a person who really likes consistent lock bar pressure, then you probably want to get the micarta version, so that shields that. But that is definitely the downside to the frame lock version. The frame lock, I'm sorry, they're both frame locks. This one's technically a bolster lock, but what does that even mean anyways? But yeah, there are not a whole lot of reasons to go otherwise. The other thing I'll point out is that is about a 3.25-inch knife. We're looking at 2.98 ounces versus 3.27, right? The micarta is a little bit lighter, right? So I would generally recommend that you go the micarta version, but at the same time, if you like the sterility of the tie, yeah, go for it, have fun. Next thing, and this is not so much about the knife, but it is about sort of the knife relative to the competition. There is a flooded market right now, right? This has the feeling of yet another overseas-made Bestech frame lock done by a designer, right? That is because it is yet another overseas-made Bestech frame lock made by a designer, right? And to be clear, the design is nice. It's very good. It's well made. It's solid. But if you have handled one or two Bestech factory knives in the last year or so, you kind of know exactly how this is in terms of action and smoothness and hardness in a lot of respects. There is nothing exciting or new or different or frankly exceptional about the construction or the build. As a result, that's a factor that just doesn't, well, factor in, right? For seasoned collectors who already have a bunch of Bestech frame locks, this might be a harder sell, right? It might not be as interesting as something that is really raising the bar mechanically, right? Or has something different in terms of construction. This feels like a Bestech-made frame lock. That's not a terrible thing to be clear, but it just feels like another of them. And the design is really the thing that makes this exceptional to the extent that anything does. So it is definitely competing in a market just full of self-published frame locks, right? That the world is completely suffused with them, and this is another. Then finally, on the bad side, this is pricey. As I mentioned, this is about $300 in the U.S. I appreciate the fact that both of these knives are equivalently priced, which takes that out as a factor, and the $25 shipping does hit you pretty hard in the U.S. I imagine in Australia, this is probably a much better deal than a lot of the other stuff that's coming from the States or that's coming from companies in the States from China originally. So in Australia, this might actually be a stellar deal, right? And if that's the case, then go for it. And to be clear, I don't begrudge him the shipping cost, right? It's harder to be competitive when you're not, using the same drop ship everyone else is. But it is pricey, and particularly relative to other pieces by Chinese OEMs like we and Bestech and whatnot, this is up there. Right? There were a lot of great choices and even some great made in the USA choices at this kind of price point. And so $300 is a good chunk of change. It's a good knife, but that's a lot of money. And so, to me, that's the bad, is that it is very pricey. It is competing in an absolutely flooded market. The frame lock does have some variance with lock bar pressure. It could use a little bit more sharpening choil, and I'm not particularly a fan of the numbering in steel on the backspacer here itself. That could have been hidden a little better. On the ugly front, I don't think there's anything ugly here. The knife itself is actually pretty damn good, so that'll bring us to the final conclusion, where I'll tell you that the knife itself is pretty damn good in a lot of ways, right? It's a nicely designed knife with pretty easy takedown, subtle branding, and unobtrusive lanyard hole. The good ergos, a nice bolster lock sort of design on this guy. It's good, it's solid, it's Bestech build quality, it's a clean, simple design. It has a very nice blade that's great for cutting things. There are some flaws. It's got a weird choice in numbering location. It's got a bit of a missing sharpening choil, a frame lock that is really vulnerable to the lock bar pressure on the full tie version. It is doing a pretty common thing in a very flooded market, and it is more than a little bit pricey. In terms of final conclusion, for me, first off, micarta is where I will send you, right? This doesn't mean that titanium is bad, and if you like the sterility of the metal, that's fine. But for me, the micarta makes more sense, because for a front flipper especially, where you open it up by doing this kind of thing, it is just nicer not to have to worry about lock bar pressure. You can put your fingers wherever they naturally want to go as you are flipping the knife open, and it works, right? That's a beautiful thing. It is also nice to have the little bit of lighter weight, right? That doesn't hurt anything really ever. And it feels a little bit more off the beaten path design-wise, right? There are more knives that look like this than look like this. And considering the micarta is of fine quality, I would send you there first, right? If you like the titanium, good on you, have fun, but at the same time, they're the same price too, so there's no real benefit in going either way that way. But for me, this is a very clear choice. I carried this one a lot. This one, I think I did one day just as an experiment, but ended up going back here. But ultimately, my feeling on the knife overall is a little bit more complicated. At some level, this is yet another self-published knife from a Chinese factory, right? Another designer worked with another overseas factory, produce another own brand front flipper frame lock. This is not the first time this has happened. This is probably not the first time this has happened this week. The result here is predictably good. We are at the point now where these factories, particularly Bestech, is able to do great, fine, no problems, pretty consistently, right? But construction, as a result, is no better or worse than any of the other 50 or so that are going to happen this year, right? And it's equivalent to Bestech's own brand stuff, right? I don't feel like they're doing anything worse or better here. They're just making another Bestech. And this is true. This is undeniable fact. And if this were the only factor at play, then honestly, this would be an easy pass at this price point. It wouldn't really matter. But not all designers who are doing that are alike, right? There is massive variation in design quality among self-publishing knife designers, right? It is a huge difference between the worst and the best of these, right? There are people who self-publish knives that never should have seen the light of day, with serious design flaws where it's just like feature salad, where it's like, oh, we put a flipper and the front flipper and the button lock, and we also put a thumb stud on there, and guess what? It's just like, you didn't do any of those well. And the pricing on those can be someplace between aspirational, like, hey, good luck with that, have fun, and just like outright insulting. So there is that side of the self-publishing knife market. You're not seeing that on this channel because, no, I'm sorry, absolutely not. But then, on the other end are folks like Grambeau here, who are very clearly putting in the time and putting in the thought to excel. When you are a designer who is having your work made by somebody else, the only thing that distinguishes your work is the quality of the design. And I feel like this is a design with quality. This knife shows a lot of time and a lot of thought, right? Even though the build quality is kind of fine and unremarkable, the resulting knife feels quite good because he's thought it through for the hand. The ergonomics are good. He's thought it through for the blade. He's thought it through for the clip and for the carry. Like, okay, another example of this, right? If you hold this guy in your pocket here, this knife, if you're carrying it the right side, this knife will naturally push itself off to the corner of the pocket there. And this blade will tuck in there. So this guy gets out of your way when you're carrying it. It's a little detail, but it's an important one. And it's one of those things that makes me look at this and go, oh yeah, okay, this person's thinking. Right? And so, as a result, it's a knife that is really well thought out, and actually it's a knife that I like a fair bit, right? I actually carried this recently on a trip. I was making a short little trip, right? And I just threw it in the suitcase thinking, I'll give it an extra shot, right? So I wanted to really get a sense of what I felt about it. 4 days just with this knife, and you know what? No complaints. I was happy with it. It is well thought out. It is well made. It is, generally speaking, a pretty damn good knife. But these days, good isn't good enough. Good isn't enough on its own, right? There are so many people making good knives that you need more than that. And the key ends up being the design. This is a knife that you buy because you like this design. If you are looking at this knife right now and saying, wow, I love that design, then this is interesting. But otherwise, the build quality is not unique. The feature set is not unique. The factory is not unique. And the price on this guy is not really compelling enough to make you consider it regardless, right? If this were $150, oh boy, we'd be having a different discussion. I would be calling this like everybody just go buy one, right? But at $300, you have to love something about it. And the thing that you're going to be able to love about this knife is the design, because that's the thing that sets it apart. So if you're looking at this knife and you're saying, it doesn't really look like my thing, then you are correct. This is not your thing. Fundamentally, there are lots of knives that are cheaper and just as good. If you don't want this design, if you don't care about this design, then don't do it. But if you're looking at this and you're saying, I like that. I like the look of that. I like the angles, I like the lines, I like all the various elements of it. This is a piece that is appealing to me, then this is good. And it's a very, very solid daily carry knife. used it as such, it is great in that regard. And so if you like the design, you want a solid carry knife, and you don't mind paying a new maker a little bit more for the privilege of having it, then I think you should absolutely consider the Assetto to be a possible asset for your collection. Okay, there you go. I hope I said enough about this, Assetto. No, okay, that was bad. I said too much already. Thanks. Hope this is very interesting to you, and that you have yourselves just an absolutely wonderful rest of your day. Bye now.